There is a place in Louisville, Kentucky, where the noise of the world no longer reaches. No crowd roars here. No bell rings. No fists fly through the air. Only wind. Only silence. And beneath a simple stone lies a man who once shook the entire planet with his voice. This is not just a grave. This is the final chapter of a champion. This is the grave of Muhammad Ali. The cemetery does not announce him with grandeur. There are no golden statues, no towering monument stretching toward the sky, no sculpted image frozen in a victorious pose. Instead, there is simplicity. A clean stone, a name carved with care, dates marking the beginning and the end of a life. Muhammad Ali, 1942-2016. For a man who once called himself the greatest, the quiet here is almost shocking. Birds pass overhead without knowing who rests below. Leaves fall without applause. The world moves on, unaware that beneath this patch of earth lies a man who once stopped wars with words and bent time with his fists. This grave does not scream greatness. It whispers humility. Visitors often stand in silence, unsure of what to feel. Some expect emotion to crash over them like a wave. Others expect inspiration. Many expect sadness. But what they encounter instead is calm. And that calm raises a question that echoes louder than any boxing bell. How does the loudest man in sports history end in such silence? Muhammad Ali's journey did not begin with peace. It began with fire. Born Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr. in 1942 in a segregated America, his childhood was shaped by division. Different water fountains, different schools, different futures determined by the color of skin. He was not born a champion. He was born into a fight. The young boy who would one day dominate the world was once just another face in Louisville, curious, restless, searching. When his bicycle was stolen, anger burned inside him. That anger led him to a boxing gym. And that gym changed history. Inside those walls, fists found purpose. Movement found meaning. And a voice, sharp, confident, fearless, began to form. Even then, silence was never an option for him. Standing by his grave today, it is hard to imagine that voice. The man who once predicted the round he would knock his opponents out. The man who taunted giants and smiled while doing it. The man who spoke not only for himself, but for millions who felt unseen. All of that ends here. No microphone. No cameras. No chance of Ali. Just earth. And yet this grave feels heavier than most. Because it does not hold just a body. It holds moments, decisions, courage, pain, legacy. The stone does not list his championships. It does not mention titles won or records broken. There is no reference to the fights that defined eras. Why? Because Muhammad Ali understood something that few champions ever do. Glory is temporary. Fame fades. Belts rust. But impact remains. This grave reflects that understanding. People from around the world come here. Some kneel. Some pray. Some simply stand and stare. They are not here just for boxing. They are here for what he represented. A man who refused to fight in a war he did not believe in. A man who lost everything for his principles. A man who returned, not bitter but stronger. Standing over his final resting place, visitors often realize something unsettling. The world's greatest boxer lies in the same ground as everyone else. No special soil. No elevated land. Death, it seems, makes no exceptions. But Muhammad Ali's grave does something unusual. It teaches. It teaches that strength does not need decoration, that greatness does not demand display, that the loudest lives often end in the quietest truths. Here the champion rests not as a fighter, but as a man. And that may be his greatest victory of all. Before the world learned the name etched into that quiet grave, there was another name. A longer name. A heavier name. Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr. It was a name rooted in American history, passed down without choice, carried like an inheritance that came with invisible chains. For years the boy answered to it. He wore it. He fought under it. He won Olympic gold under it. Yet even as the name echoed through stadiums, it never truly belonged to him. Standing by his grave today, it becomes clear that Muhammad Ali was not born all at once. He was constructed slowly, painfully through defiance. The young Cassius Clay burst into the boxing world with speed that confused opponents and confidence that offended critics. He moved differently. He spoke differently. He refused to bow. While others let their fists speak, Clay used his mouth as a weapon just as sharp. He rhymed. He boasted. He laughed in the face of fear. Many dismissed him as arrogant. Some called him a clown. But beneath the poetry and bravado was something far more dangerous to the establishment: independence. America in the 1960s was uncomfortable with outspoken black men. It preferred champions who smiled politely, thanked the crowd, and stayed quiet about injustice. Cassius Clay did none of that. He talked too much. He won too often. And worst of all, he began to think for himself. The turning point did not come inside the ring. It came in the mind. After winning the heavyweight championship in 1964, Cassius Clay did something the world was not prepared for. He announced he had joined the Nation of Islam. He rejected the name given to him by what he called a history of oppression. "I don't have to be what you want me to be," he said. Soon after, he declared his new name: Muhammad Ali. The reaction was immediate and violent in tone. Sports writers refused to use it. Television hosts mocked it. Opponents deliberately mispronounced it. Some flatly rejected it. To them, Cassius Clay was acceptable. Muhammad Ali was a threat. Names are not just words. They are identities. By changing his name, Ali did not merely rename himself. He reclaimed ownership of his life. Standing at his grave now, the stone confirms that decision forever. There is no Cassius Clay carved there. Only Muhammad Ali. The world had no choice but to accept it in death, even if it resisted it in life. Ali's voice grew louder after his transformation. Not reckless, not ignorant, purposeful. He spoke about race. He spoke about faith. He spoke about dignity. And when America called him to fight in the Vietnam War, that voice reached its sharpest edge. "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong," he said. "No Viet Cong ever called me an *****R. Those words would cost him nearly everything. The government stripped him of his heavyweight title. Boxing commissions banned him. He was sentenced to prison, facing the very real possibility of losing years of his life behind bars. At the peak of his physical power, Muhammad Ali was silenced, not by illness, not by defeat, but by punishment. For 3.5 years, the ring was taken away. Standing by his grave, it becomes impossible not to think of that irony. The man who would later lose his voice to disease once lost his platform to principle. During those years, Ali aged. His reflexes dulled. His prime slipped away. But something else grew stronger. His legacy. He became more than a boxer. He became a symbol. To some, he was a traitor. to others a hero. History would eventually decide. When Muhammad Ali finally returned to boxing, he was no longer just fighting opponents. He was fighting time. He was fighting doubt. He was fighting the consequences of his own courage. Yet he returned anyway. Because champions, real champions, are not defined by comfort. They are defined by conviction. Looking back from the silence of his grave, the journey from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali feels inevitable. A straight line drawn through chaos. The boy who refused to stay quiet became the man who refused to surrender his name, his beliefs, or his dignity. That transformation is not written on the stone above him, but it is felt in the air around it. Because this grave does not belong to a man who simply fought well. It belongs to a man who chose who he would be, no matter the cost. The silence surrounding Muhammad Ali's grave feels heavier when one remembers how loud the world once was for him inside the ring. Boxing arenas used to tremble when he fought. Not from fear alone, but from anticipation. People did not just come to see Muhammad Ali win. They came to see how he would do it. Standing over his final resting place, it is almost impossible to imagine that this calm earth once held the most electric athlete of the 20th century. Muhammad Ali did not fight like other heavyweights. Heavyweights were supposed to be slow. They were meant to plant their feet, trade power, and rely on brute strength. Ali rejected that idea completely. He danced. His feet barely touched the canvas. His head slipped punches that should have landed. His arms snapped forward with speed that seemed unnatural for a man of his size. Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. It sounded like poetry. It was actually a warning. Opponents entered the ring already defeated in their minds. Ali spoke before the fight, during the fight, and sometimes even while being punched. He predicted rounds. He named the moment of defeat. And more often than not, he delivered exactly what he promised. This was not arrogance. It was psychological warfare. He broke fighters before he broke their bodies. Standing at his grave, one might wonder how a man so alive in motion could ever be contained by death. But memory keeps him moving. The fight against Sonny Liston changed everything. Liston was feared. Liston was dominant. Liston was supposed to destroy the loud young challenger. Instead, the impossible happened. Ali stood over Liston's fallen body, shouting words that would echo through history. The image became iconic. The moment became myth. At that instant, boxing entered a new era. Ali's greatness was not built on one victory. It was forged through wars. Joe Frazier, George Foreman, Ken Norton. Each name represents pain. Each fight took something from him. The fight of the century against Frazier was not just a match. It was a collision of identities. Ali lost and the world saw something new, vulnerability. But champions are not defined by undefeated records. They are defined by response. Ali responded with resilience. The rumble in the jungle was not supposed to be possible. George Foreman was younger, stronger, unstoppable. Ali was older, slower, supposedly finished. Then came the rope-a-dope. Ali leaned against the ropes, absorbed punishment, whispered into Foreman's ear and waited. When Foreman tired, Ali struck. The knockout shocked the world. Standing by his grave now, one realizes that this moment was more than strategy. It was wisdom over force, patience over aggression. The thriller in Manila against Joe Frazier took nearly everything. Heat, exhaustion, pain beyond description. Ali later said it was the closest thing to death he had ever experienced. And yet he endured. When Frazier's corner stopped the fight, Ali collapsed, not in triumph but in survival. That fight did not make him stronger physically. It made him eternal. The championships returned. The cheers grew louder. The legend expanded beyond the ring. Muhammad Ali was no longer just the greatest heavyweight boxer. He was the standard by which greatness itself was measured. Standing at his grave, it becomes clear that none of his victories are engraved there. No list of opponents. No tally of belts. Why would there be? The earth already knows. Every scar he carried returned to it. Every breath he spent in battle now rests. But the impact remains above ground. Ali redefined what it meant to be a champion. Not perfect, not invincible, but fearless in the face of loss. He showed that greatness is not about avoiding defeat. It is about facing it publicly and rising anyway. The quiet stone above him does not need to speak, because the ring already told his story. The grave of Muhammad Ali is quiet in a way that feels intentional. It is not the silence of being forgotten. It is the silence of exhaustion, earned over decades of battle. Standing there, one cannot help but think of the price he paid for greatness. Because long before his voice softened, his body had already begun to surrender. Muhammad Ali absorbed punishment that few humans could endure. Thousands of punches, years of sparring, endless wars inside the ring. Each fight took seconds from his speed, minutes from his reflexes, and pieces from his future. But champions rarely feel the cost when the crowd is roaring. The bill always arrives later. The first signs were subtle. A slight tremor, a delayed response, a softness in the hands that once struck with lightning speed. At first, many refused to believe it. Muhammad Ali was indestructible, or so the world thought. But the body remembers what applause forgets. In 1984, the diagnosis became official. Parkinson's disease, a neurological condition that slowly robs control, precision, and eventually speech. For a man whose greatest weapon had always been his voice, the irony was cruel. The same hands that once danced through the air now struggled to stay still. Standing by his grave, the silence feels heavier knowing that it was not sudden. It was a long goodbye. Ali did not disappear overnight. He faded slowly in public view. And the world watched, some with compassion, some with discomfort, some with guilt. His speech softened. His movement slowed. The man who once filled arenas with words now chose them carefully. Yet even as Parkinson's took his strength, it could not take his dignity. Ali never hid. He showed the world what illness looks like when courage refuses to leave. The moment that defined this era came in 1996. The Olympic Games in Atlanta. Millions watched as Muhammad Ali stepped forward to light the Olympic torch. His hands trembled. His body shook. But his presence was overwhelming. When the flame ignited, the stadium erupted, not in celebration of athletic achievement, but in recognition of human resilience. Standing at his grave now, that image feels closer than any championship. Because that moment was not about power. It was about survival. Parkinson's reduced his voice, but it amplified his message. Ali became an ambassador for the disease, a symbol of perseverance. He traveled. He met leaders. He continued to inspire without punching a single opponent. The fighter had become the lesson. Pain followed him quietly. Simple tasks became battles. Speech required effort. Movement demanded patience. Yet never once did he ask for pity. The man who once declared himself the greatest now taught humility through suffering. As the years passed, his public appearances grew rarer. But when he did appear, the response was instant. People stood. People cried. People remembered. Because even in silence, Muhammad Ali commanded attention. Standing at his grave, one realizes that Parkinson's did not defeat him. Time did. And time defeats everyone. What makes Ali different is how he faced it. Without denial. Without bitterness. Without surrender. This part of his life is not written on the stone above him. There is no mention of disease. No acknowledgement of pain. Because the grave does not define his struggle. His endurance does. The champion who once ruled the ring ended his days teaching the world how to endure loss of control without losing self. And that lesson lingers here, in the quiet air surrounding his final resting place. The world did not hear the news all at once. It moved slowly, passing from screen to screen, from phone to phone, from one quiet room to another. Muhammad Ali was gone. On June 3, 2016, the fighter who had once seemed larger than life became part of history. Standing by his grave now, it is difficult to imagine that moment, the instant when a man known by billions took his final breath in silence. Ali died in Scottsdale, Arizona, after years of complications related to Parkinson's disease. He was 74 years old. The body that had endured so much finally rested. And when it did, the world paused. News channels interrupted programming. Social media filled with tributes. Athletes, politicians, artists, and ordinary people spoke his name. Not just as a boxer, not just as a champion, but as a symbol. The days that followed were filled with remembrance. Louisville, Kentucky, the city where his journey began, became the center of global mourning. Thousands lined the streets. Some held signs. Some held flowers. Some held silence. They were not there for spectacle. They were there to say goodbye. Ali's funeral was not small, but it was dignified. It reflected the man himself. World leaders stood beside childhood friends. Celebrities stood beside ordinary citizens. For once, the divisions that had followed Ali throughout his life seemed to fade. Death had done what controversy never could. It united. The procession moved through familiar streets. Places where Ali had once run. Places where he had once spoken. Places that shaped him. The crowd did not chant. They watched. Because some goodbyes are too heavy for noise. Standing at his grave now, it is clear that the funeral was not about boxing. It was about meaning. Speakers did not list his victories. They spoke of his courage, his faith, his willingness to stand alone. They spoke of a man who used fame not for comfort, but for responsibility. One voice spoke of Ali as a citizen of the world. Another called him a man of peace who once fought for a living. The contradictions made sense. Muhammad Ali was never simple. When the burial finally came, it was private. No cameras. No crowds. Just family. Just earth. The champion returned to the ground quietly. Standing at the grave today, one might expect heaviness. But there is something else here. Acceptance. Ali had prepared the world for this moment, not through words, but through years of visible decline. He showed humanity what it looks like to age with grace. The stone does not speak of death as tragedy. It presents it as completion. A life lived fully, returned gently. People still come. Years later, they still come. Not to mourn what was lost, but to remember what was given. Because Muhammad Ali did not belong to one nation. He belonged to the world. The day he died, the world stood still. But standing here now, it becomes clear that his influence never did. The grave of Muhammad Ali does not demand attention. It does not rise above the others. It does not compete for the eye. It rests. Standing before it, one understands that this was intentional. For a man who once stood at the center of the world, rest itself became the final statement. What remains after the crowds fade? Not belts, not trophies, not headlines. What remains are choices. Muhammad Ali's life was defined by decisions that carried consequences. Some brought glory, others brought loss, but none were accidental. He chose to speak when silence was safer. He chose belief over convenience. He chose principle over profit. These choices did not always make him popular, but they made him permanent. The grave reminds us of equality. In life, Ali was elevated above most. In death, he rests as all humans do. The same earth, the same stillness. Greatness, it seems, does not change the ending, only the journey. Visitors often leave quietly, not because there is nothing to say, but because there is too much to consider. This grave does not invite celebration. It invites reflection. Ali taught the world that strength is not only physical, it is moral. He showed that courage does not always look like victory. Sometimes it looks like refusal. Sometimes it looks like loss. Sometimes it looks like standing alone. Even in his final years, when his body betrayed him, Ali continued to teach. He taught patience through suffering. He taught humility through illness. He taught dignity without words. The loudest man in boxing history became a lesson in quiet endurance. Standing here, the timeline collapses. The boy from Louisville, the champion of the world, the rebel, the patient, the legend, they all converge beneath this stone. The grave does not close his story. It completes it. Because Muhammad Ali was never just a boxer. He was a mirror, a reflection of courage, of contradiction, of humanity. Long after the final bell, long after the final breath, the lesson remains. True champions are not measured by what they win, but by what they stand for. The wind moves gently through the cemetery. Leaves fall. Time continues. And Muhammad Ali rests, not as the greatest, but as a man who showed the world how to fight, how to fall, and how to leave with dignity.